founders should just be really blunt about their shortcomings, because there's this weird dynamic that happens where like the founder says, hey, we're perfect and we're great. No company is perfect, literally zero.
Welcome back to 40-Minute Mentor, the podcast on a mission to raise aspirations and inspire the next generation of category-defining founders, all in just 40 minutes. Today, I'm joined by Molly Alter, partner at Northzone, a JBM client and a multi-stage fund partnering with founders from seed to growth across Europe and the US. Molly started her career in VC in 2016, straight out of Harvard University, where she completed her degree in history of science. Since then, Molly has worked with some of the biggest funds in the industry, including Insight Partners and Index Ventures. Now at Northzone and back in New York, Molly focuses on vertical SaaS and AI across early and growth stages. I can't wait to dive into Molly's amazing career to date and learn more about her cross-continental experiences. So, welcome to 40-Minute Mentor, Molly. It's a real pleasure to have you here. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. And thank you so much for having me. It's a privilege to be on the podcast.
The privilege is all ours. Thank you for being here. Well, you're in New York today. I'm in rainy England, and we're going to warm you up with some quick-fire questions so our audience can get to know you a bit better. So please finish the following sentences after me. Number one, the best career decision I've ever made was...
I'm going to start off spicy. Not going to business school.
Oh, okay. Tell me more. I know these are quick fire, but I want to find out why not.
I think that business school is a really amazing resource if you want to pivot careers. But I think if you're doing the thing that you like, I don't feel that it makes sense to take time away from doing what you're doing. And so I made the decision to stick with venture because I was loving it. And I think it ended up being really helpful for my career over the longer term.
Love that. Thank you. The hardest lesson I've learned as a VC is...
I think timing can be your best friend and your worst enemy.
That's so true. Thank you. One misconception about VC I'd love to correct is...
that the only way to enter in this industry, or the best way, is to be an operator first. I think there are many paths for folks who, like myself, have been investors through and through.
Yeah, love it. I think the combination of those two things is like makes for an amazing, really powerful sort of fund. And I've seen that increasingly. Like there's definitely like some of the best investors I've ever seen have always been investors. And then I've seen some amazing ones that kind of bring that operator lens. So yeah, there's definitely different paths for sure.
Totally. There's no one size fits all. Exactly.
Yeah. And that's definitely inspiring for our audience, many of whom I think want to become VCs. So there's different paths to go down. The biggest shift I see coming in VC is...
I think that VC is going to eat private equity, not all of it, but some of it. And I think that, VCs are seeing companies earlier along their trajectory, and, the PE value add model over the years has been to come in and be really kind of roll up their sleeves and make these businesses more efficient. But we now have a lot of AI tools that can do that. And so I think that VCs might end up capturing some more of that value earlier on and driving efficiencies for their companies that they have a minority stake in, and maybe, building those ownerships over time as well. But we'll see.
I like that a lot. Watch out, PE. VC is coming for you.
Yeah, watch your back. We're coming for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Molly. We've warmed you up nicely there. And we're going to talk all things VC in your amazing career. But before we get into it, I want to turn back the clocks because I heard you were into a lot of theatre growing up. So I want to hear all about your upbringing. Sounds like a creative one, and learn a bit more about some of those early career aspirations. What were those?
Yeah, so I actually grew up in a family of journalists, and we used to talk about political things a lot at home. My dad is a political journalist. My mom's a television producer. I have two siblings. They ended up growing up to be a political journalist and a television producer as well. So I wasn't really as oriented into the business side of the world. And I was very excited by kind of creative endeavors like theater. As you mentioned, I was definitely a theater kid. Still am obsessed with Les Miserables. I did a lot of improv and making little videos, mockumentary type videos in my free time. So it was really, I guess carefree in the sense that when I was in high school and even early on in college, I wasn't even thinking about my career at all and kind of just had this sort of luxurious approach to life where I thought, okay, I'll figure all that stuff out later. But then, I guess as I got into college, I do remember I literally just woke up one morning and I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do with my life? I don't think that I'm talented enough to be a comedian or, an actress. And I actually don't even know if I want that because so much of the fun of creative endeavors is that they're not my profession. And so then I had to really sort of think about what I wanted to do to make money and more importantly to have an impact on the world.
Well, it sounds like you've made the right call. But I know before we get on to the kind of becoming a VC, I know you started a company when you were at Harvard as a student. So tell us a bit more about that experience and what it taught you.
Yeah, so actually after I woke up that morning, like my sophomore year, I think of college, I was like, okay, I should maybe think about something more practical. And I was interested in business just because I didn't know very much about it. And I felt like it was how the world worked and was intrigued by that. But I also, there's an expression for writers, they say write what you know. And I think for building a business, it's really important to build something that you're at least a little bit familiar with. And so I knew, theater and live events very well. I'd been performing in different shows and involved in different troupes. And the members of the troupe would always want a video of the performance because they would dance or whatever, do some play and want to send it to their grandparents. And so I thought that could be an interesting market. And, we set up with a lot of really amazing kind of students and soon to be colleagues, we set up a small business that would go to these live events, essentially just set up two fancy cameras, edit the footage together and sell it back to the people who were in those troupes. And that ended up going really well. We had a very sort of thriving live events video production company. We started doing some creative work as well, where students at the business school would want a little video for their startup, and we would go and make that. And it was a very organic way to understand how a P&L works because, again, I was super uneducated. I was studying history. And I remember I would say, like, okay, well, if I pay the people that go and set up the cameras the same, but I charge the customers more, I think that means that my margin is getting higher. And it was super organic and really a fun way to kind of dip my toes into the business world.
Yeah, great. I love that. It's amazing how these sorts of things often come organically, but you can learn some really important lessons from them, especially when you're younger and you're sort of working out the right path. Do you think you've always had that entrepreneurial spirit? Because clearly you're on the investing side, working with tons of entrepreneurs. You've had a taste of what it takes to start a business. Is that from your family? Is that inherent? Where does that come from?
I think so much of it is kind of learned or through circumstance. I was reflecting back on this. My parents, they were very ambitious in their careers, different, and not in the business world, but they also worked very long hours. My mom worked in late night comedy. So she would get home, very late in the evening. My dad the same. And so I had these like long afternoons where I was extremely independent as a kid for many years. And it wasn't like a sad sort of latchkey type thing. It was fun. Like I would say, okay, I want to go to the pizzeria. I'm going to the pizzeria. And I think it gave me a lot of confidence and sort of, more of an entrepreneurial itch. And when I ran that, very small, like sort of silly student company, I remember feeling, really gratified and thinking like, okay, I'm going to obviously seek input and gather data. But at the end of the day, I can just figure things out and do them and just execute. And that was really, really fun. And frankly, something as an investor, that I envy in the entrepreneurs I work with is that real independent spirit. But I'm lucky enough to still get to be close enough to it. And also, building a firm is entrepreneurial in its own right.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you for sharing that. Do you think when you sort of had that early taste of entrepreneurship, were you kind of set on that founder path initially? Did you think post college that you would go down that route? Tell us a bit about how you ended up in VC, because it feels like you were maybe going down a different route and then the lure of investing took over. So tell us a bit about that period of your career.
Absolutely. Yeah. So after running a small business, I was like, oh, maybe I'll go do a startup and go into technology. But I think I was very aware of my own naivete. And I think that was, a gift. It's lucky to be able to know how much you don't know. And sometimes, there are some people that say, thank God I didn't know more because, I wouldn't have gotten into this amazing career or started this business if I had been wiser. But in my case, I really didn't know a lot. And I felt like it was super interesting to me to go into an industry where you get this, broad exposure to so many different kinds of business models and companies and markets. And the notion I had was, maybe I would do that for a few years and then go and figure out what I wanted to actually start. That was kind of the frame of mind I was in, when I was a senior in college. And I was very fortunate. This woman reached out to me on Facebook Messenger and said, hey, I work at this firm called Insight Partners, and I heard about you and your little business. Clearly, you're interested in entrepreneurship, and here's what we're doing. It made kind of the decision very, very easy for me. But yeah, as the years went on at Insight, I kept thinking like, okay, well now I've learned enough and I can go and start a company. And as the years ticked by, I was like, you know what? I just love this too much. I can't do that. I'm hooked.
Oh, it's amazing though. Love that you found your calling, and I think it's sometimes it's rare, right? A lot of people don't find that for a long time or ever. So to find something that you love, that's a real blessing. And clearly it's been incredibly successful. Before we come on to sort of diving into all things investing, do you think your creative background, the fact you come from a creative household, you did a lot of theatre and improv and things like that, has that helped you as a VC in any way? And if so, how?
Absolutely. I mean, VCs at the end of the day, we're selling the ultimate commodity product, which is money. It's all the same. And, to stand out historically, VCs have kind of built additional things on top of that, which can differentiate themselves, like platform teams, really top resources, and Northzone has done all of that in a really great way. But still, it comes down to the investor themselves to really differentiate themselves. And it's very important to be creative to do so. So, examples of this can be sending very creative cold emails, which is a huge part of the job that there's no getting around, or thinking creatively around what spaces are interesting. Sending a creative gift to a founder that's not responding to you can be helpful. But I think actually the most that my creative angle has actually helped me in my career was through a direct investment into a company called Frame.io. And that was a rare case. I don't know if it'll ever happen again, though I hope it does, where I had been using the product myself as like a weekend warrior making videos. And Frame.io is like a Google Docs for video editing. It allows for collaboration on video assets. And so I'd been using it, and I was like, this company, it's just, we have to invest. And I kind of stomped my feet about it. And it ended up being a great investment when I was at Insight, and we sold it to Adobe, and it was a really fantastic $1 billion outcome. And that was one where not only did my sort of weekend warrior creativity helped me find the company, but also as I was building a relationship with the founder, who was also, quite a creative, it helped to be able to speak, their language. And this happens with everyone. There are some people that have this passion or interest for education and they want to work at education nonprofits, and maybe that helps them find one really great education investment. And so I think leveraging whatever sort of interest or superpower you have is something not to be wasted in our career, and it shouldn't be sort of seen as a dalliance, I guess.
That's really great advice. I guess on this podcast today, particularly on our VC feature series, we've had people that have been founders and then investors. We've had operators and investors. We've had people that have actually started their investing career as angels and then they end up in a fund. I don't know if we've had anyone that's come straight out of university into a fund and then has built a career and got all the way to partner. So I feel like this is a great opportunity to ask you, like, what was it like learning the ropes straight out of university? How did you get up to speed, wrapping your head around what venture's all about? I guess for anyone that might be listening to this, that might be sort of hoping to start out in the industry.
Yeah, I think it really was a gift to be able to start early. First of all, I do believe that becoming a good investor requires a very broad surface area. And when you're learning the ropes at a place like Insight or any of these firms that take young kind of hustlers, they're expecting you to take 25 plus calls with founders every single week. And when you do that, you quickly learn how to pattern match. And you also learn an incredible amount about what exists versus what doesn't, which sounds very simple. But as an investor, that's one of the most important things you can know is just like, is this already out there? And am I wasting my time? Or is this actually something new? And it's hard to do that kind of volume as you get older. There are people who have had long operating careers and they're maybe 38 and they go and they don't necessarily want to take 25 calls a week. And they can still be amazing investors because they bring something else to the table. But I do think there is a real place for people that have just kind of focused and learned through experience and volume what good looks like. So, I think there is a place for both archetypes, but I feel a tremendous amount of gratitude for the fact that I'm not super old yet, but at my tenure, I can look back and say, like, okay, well, I remember the first iteration of this type of company in 2016, and this is what they looked like. And I weirdly will, still sometimes remember the names of companies, and you can go back and see what happened to them. And that's been something that's very valuable for me.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And anyone that's kind of trying to crack into the industry at the beginning of their career right now, are there any particular qualities or characteristics or things you would encourage them to think about in order to kind of, one, get ahead, maybe get into the industry, but then get ahead and really maximize that opportunity?
Yeah, I think the advice I always give to people who are trying to get into the industry is to start doing the job before you have the job. And it's surprising how easy it is to actually be a VC without having any of the resources of a firm. So let's say you have a couple of friends who work at startups. You can interview them casually, like take them to lunch or whatever, and ask them questions about their business and questions that you think would be relevant to your own decision making process if you were going to give them your own money to invest. And if you wanted to do, early stage investing, write out a thesis about where you think, some section of the world is going, and then what kinds of companies you think should be backed as a result of that. If you want to do growth, go find a bunch of companies that have exploding headcount on LinkedIn. Think through which of those companies might have structural advantages. And then if you want to get a job at a firm, send that over. Send over your thesis, send over that list of companies. And the person on the other end of the email is going to say, wow, this person actually already knows how to do the job. And sure, we can help mentor them and grow them as a professional, but they're starting off on the right foot.
Yeah, I love that advice. Thank you. Well, you've kind of been down this path and you see what great looks like in terms of the funds you've worked at. 4 years at Insight, such an amazing company. Index Ventures, another client of JBM's for 3 years, which is an incredible business. And then recently, Northzone, where you've been had a recent promotion to partner, and we love the team over there. So tell us a bit about how your approach over the course of your career as an investor has evolved. Particularly interested in how you've worked with founders and any key learnings from the kind of different stages of your career.
Yeah, I think in the early years of my career, I was understandably and rightfully less confident. And so I focused on finding deals that had very strong external validation. So, like great metrics that were really clear as day to anyone that could see them. And I think I was much more deferential to founders because they were so much older and wiser than I was. And I think, as I've matured, I still do love good metrics for sure. Can't really beat that. But I think I have more confidence in my own conviction into companies that are less obvious and maybe generate more alpha as a result. And I also think, naturally as you develop in your career, you're less afraid of the founders that you work with. And I've definitely felt this. And it's not to say I want them to be afraid of me at all, but it's more so you kind of come to learn that everyone is human. No one is Superman. We're all trying our best. And really the only way to move forward productively with founders is to kind of cut the bullshit and be honest with each other and just try to help as much as you can. So yeah, I think, throughout the firms I've been at, I've really evolved and learned so much. And there were so many areas that I used to be really weak in that I've worked on. And now there are new areas that I'm weak in and I have to work on those as well.
Yeah, it's a constant evolution, isn't it? I think that this advice is going to be super helpful for anyone listening that's starting out in their career or looking to move into VC. And I guess to that point, you've shared some great suggestions of how people can potentially think about making a mark and getting sort of impressing if they're trying to crack into the industry. But what about the skills you need or the skills you've developed that have helped you get further ahead? What skills are so important to be successful as a venture investor?
I think the curiosity, it's almost a cliche. I feel like everyone says curiosity, but it's so real. I think if you're not actually interested in what people are building, it just immediately shines through. Like immediately the founder can pick up on the fact that you don't really care and you're not going to really go deeper and do the right diligence to ask the right questions because you just want to make an investment. You're not actually curious about if you're right. So that's something I think that's super important. And I also think that hard work is perhaps more so than ever really important in this industry. I think VCs have gotten a bit of a rap for being like in Ibiza in our Patagonias and just chilling out. And we definitely do a lot of that. But I think when you drill down to the VCs I admire most, they're still really gunning for it and they're super competitive and they want to win. And that requires you to be hardworking. So it's much easier to be hardworking when you're surrounded by great people. And that's part of the reason I joined Northzone as well, is that it's such a wonderful group to work hard together with.
Today's episode is sponsored by eCap Financial, your trusted partner for fractional CFO services for companies looking to fundraise or go through an M&A process. Whether you're a founder looking to raise investment, planning for an exit, or navigating financial challenges, eCap Financial, led by the brilliant Corin Thompson, helps scale up, secure the right funding at the right time. In 2024 alone, they've raised over $100 million for companies across deep tech, health tech, climate tech, compliance tech, and data aggregation. Alongside this, they completed financial due diligence for some of the best known investors in Europe. With years of experience in deal structuring and fundraising, alongside working with investors on the investing front, Corinne and her team provide expert advice to ensure you make the best financial decisions for your business growth. Make sure you check out Corinne's bonus episodes launching throughout the VC feature season and to find out more on ecapfinancial.co.uk. Now, back to today's 40-minute mentor. You've seen so many people that will have messaged you, taken you for coffee, trying to go, how do I get into this industry? And you've already shared some great advice on that. What are the common mistakes you see people making, though, when it comes to their job search? Because it's one of the most frequent questions we get from great operators that want to move into VC. So I would love to have some tangible advice here around what you see people get wrong and how they can kind of maybe avoid those pitfalls.
One thing that can be needlessly antagonistic is the pick your brain coffee chat with no agenda. And I understand how that can be really valuable for people who are trying to get into the industry because that's how you build connections and you get to know things. And so I think it's important to still do those, but to kind of reframe them and come prepared to those coffee chats with really specific questions, or better yet, some ideas that you want to share with the person. And this would lead to just, such better discussions. And I've had this happen actually not that many times. It really stands out when it does happen when someone emails me and they say, "Hey, I'm this person, blah, blah, blah. I would love to ask you these three questions." And they're very like tailored to whatever I invest in. And also I have a thesis on construction tech using generative AI for whatever documents. And there are a couple companies that I think are really interesting and I'd love to discuss with you. And that email, I'm like, oh my God, like let's chat right now. And then we have the conversation and there's so much back and forth. And afterwards I'm like, oh man, I can really imagine myself working with that person. There are very subtle tweaks you can make to the coffee chat, pick your brain that can really put you ahead.
Just be more thoughtful. I totally agree with that. I think it doesn't take a lot to take that little bit of extra effort. It's a bit like in our world, really annoys me when somebody says they really want, let's just call it a COO role in a Series A company. That's an amazing opportunity, but you're not really willing to take the time to really tailor your CV or really do the due diligence on the company, come really well prepared. I think you don't get far if you just go through the motions or you try and wing it. Just that extra bit of thought and effort really goes a long way. So I completely agree with you on that. I'd love to come on and talk about Northzone, which you're a partner at. It's a great fund. It has an incredible pedigree in terms of the sorts of investments it's made over the years. Would love to hear what attracted you yourself. I mean, you've seen what good looks like, so you know the world very well of venture. So what was it about Northzone specifically? And can you tell a bit more about the fund, just for anyone that might not have come across them before?
Of course, yeah. So for those who aren't familiar, we're a multi-stage global fund. We've got around 4 billion of AUM, and we're currently operating out of a $1.2 billion fund. We can write checks from 2.5 million all the way up to 15 million. So really great kind of flexibility and multi-stage global generalist fund. It's kind of like, well, you can invest in anything. We all as individual investors have to really narrow down into what gets us personally the most excited. But what attracted me to Northzone, it's ultimately the same thing we alluded to earlier in our conversation. Our industry is quickly becoming commodified. Like there is very little difference in many of the product offerings that firms offer today. Like a lot of us are willing to pay up. A lot of us are offering platform teams. I think Nordstrom platform team is like way better than any other one because I'm biased. But all of these things are becoming table stakes. And so at the end of the day, what has to set any firm apart is the people. And, I've known Northzone, I think, since 2016. So quite a while since I really just started out in venture. And I found the people to be just incredibly thoughtful, hardworking, ambitious, very humble. And ultimately, these are the people I wanted to spend day in, day out with. We all see our coworkers more than we see anyone else, sadly. Like, I'd love to see my parents as much as my husband, as much as I see my coworkers, but it's really important to get that right.
Yeah, it's so true. And everyone I've ever met from Northzone's been lovely. And you combine that personal touch with the brain power and the ambition, that's a pretty lethal combo. So it's no surprise the incredible investments Northzone have done over the years. Your particular focus is on vertical SaaS and AI across early and growth stages. So you've seen a lot of amazing businesses over the years. Do you mind sharing a bit more about that focus area and particularly the sorts of founders that really excite you at the moment? Who do you want to hear from?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned before, as a generalist fund, it's incumbent on us as individual investors to really be proactive on where we want to spend our time. And for me, that's been vertical software. And I think if I'm going back to first principles on why that is and why I choose to spend my time there, it's because we have these amazing developments in AI right now. And the key challenge, in my view, is how do you, again, going back to differentiation, how do you set yourselves apart? And how do you create something that won't be subsumed by these, very powerful foundational models that are sort of more horizontal in nature? And so what I see as kind of the most exciting applications are one that have what I call kind of defensibility through specificity. So let's say, for instance, I invested in a company called GovDash, which serves government contractors. And government contractors have like very specific workflows that like OpenAI I don't think really cares about. Like they have to draft these RFPs that are the way that they win bids to work with the government. And then they have to do these compliance matrices to, again, do business with the government. And right now they kind of do this in like SharePoint and Google Sheets. And so GovDash makes a vertical AI solution which automatically finds RFPs and then drafts responses. And then it kind of goes through the rest of the workflow as well and does some project management tooling and so on. And this is something which I find really compelling because it's so kind of tailored to that specific workflow that you have this really, really strong customer love, you have really strong stickiness, and you have less of a threat from some of these horizontal players. But you still have a huge upside. I mean, the US federal government spends $750 billion a year on contractors. So the kinds of founders I think that lends itself to are ones who have really zeroed in on an industry and they know it really well. Doesn't necessarily mean they've worked in that industry for decades, but maybe they just focused on it and have started learning about it and have a real kind of strategy around what is my wedge product and how does that lead to a multi-billion dollar opportunity over time. And we're hearing from more and more of those types of founders as these AI tools get even more advanced and always excited to talk to those folks.
Yeah, I mean, it's a perfect segue to talk about AI. I mean, the advancements in the past 12 months have been insane, and it's a really exciting time, I'd imagine, to be an investor in this space. What's exciting you the most about the solutions being built, and where do you see the opportunities going?
I mean, at the highest level, like I take a somewhat humanistic approach to all of this, which is, and many people will probably disagree with me, but I do think that, humans have been stuck doing non-human tasks for far too long. Like lawyers should be negotiating with other lawyers and building relationships with clients. They don't have to be sifting through documents to find a relevant clause and then like copy and paste that clause into a different document, or like doctors should be paying attention to their patients and again brainstorming novel approaches to treating their disease. They shouldn't be like manually typing into the computer every single word like a robot. And I think this applies to every industry. And the economic value that's created from leveraging AI agents essentially to automate this workflow is massive. And as investors, we will definitely benefit from that. But what I'm even more excited about, but also slightly apprehensive, is like, what will these doctors and lawyers, any other folks, do with that extra time? And I think the excited part of me is like, well, that's amazing. They're going to, if you're a doctor, build stronger relationships and think about novel types of treatment plans. But also, some people understandably worry and they say, well, is this just going to lead to mass unemployment? So it's a hairy space from like a very high level. But as we, kind of drill down and see what people are actually building, it's really been tremendous to see how many companies have been able to automate real work that was kind of human drudgery and create businesses that are growing very fast in the meantime.
Yeah, super exciting. I'd imagine there's going to be a lot of people listening to this who would love to pitch to you, Molly, and work with great fund like Northzone. So we've had a sort of turbulent few years, but it really feels like there's some optimism in the space at the moment. Like we are busier than we've been for such a long time. We know there's lots of capital being deployed. So I want this to be a message of real optimism for founders that are out there fundraising at the moment. But it's never easy to fundraise. So I wondered if you could share your pointers and tips for anyone listening that maybe needs a bit of encouragement, particularly around what you think will work best, if they come up in front of you, and also any tips around things to avoid when it comes to sort of maximizing that experience.
I agree with you. I think it's becoming a much better time for founders than it has been in the last couple of years. And a lot of folks in our industry are saying that the last couple of years were all about sort of the infrastructure layer, and now it's all about the application layer. And the application layer, kind of like we were saying before, lends itself to more startups. It's not as capital intensive as building like a Mistral or an OpenAI or Anthropic. And so it's a great time for those kinds of builders. I think it's really important, though, to not to beat a dead horse, but to focus on differentiation, because we all have access to the same models. And the best founders are ones that say, hey, of course, I'm using this infrastructure that everyone has access to, but I have real product on top, or real network effects, or UI sometimes even, that makes me different. Or data, actually, is another one. And so I think if you're able to show some real differentiation or a path towards that, and if you're able to show a pretty immediate hard dollar ROI, you'll be in very good shape. And the ROI point is really important as well, because I think that there are a lot of AI companies emerging, or just regular companies, that feel very magical, but the customers aren't actually able to tie it to business value. And those are ones that sometimes don't have as much long-term value. So differentiation and ROI, I'd say, are the kind of most important points to hit on in a pitch. And then, dreaming the dream a little bit is always fun. And as investors, we love thinking about the upside and what things can become.
Yeah, amazing. And any things that founders do that frustrate you or annoy you in the sort of when fundraising? Is there anything you can encourage them to, or just learn from, to avoid falling into those pitfalls?
So this might be a hot take, and I'm sure no people won't take this advice, but I feel like founders should just be really blunt about their shortcomings, because there's this weird dynamic that happens where like the founder says, "Hey, we're perfect and we're great." No company is perfect, literally zero. And then the investor said they do their diligence and they say, "Aha, I found it. There's a lot of churn." And then they kind of get deflated about the opportunity and they go back to the founder and say, "Hey, we're passing. There's too much churn." And if the founder would say instead, "Hey, we're really great on these areas, and this area is something we're working on, and we've had a lot of churn, and it's because we haven't really been targeting our ICP or customer profile appropriately, and here's how we're changing that." Then there's no aha moment. Then as the investor, you're like, "Oh, yeah, well, they have a good head around it, and as a founder, I really trust them to know where their weak points are, and I trust they have a strategy there." So yeah, I think just like maybe having more honesty or more bluntness about what's not going right is something that few founders do.
It's super important. Yeah, I agree. There's no point trying to convince people that you're perfect and that everything in a start, nothing is perfect in startup life. We all get so many things wrong. And actually, it's a part of building trust, isn't it? Like, to get the conviction from you to part with serious amounts of money and to come on that journey, it's much better to be open about your shortcomings and be receptive to feedback.
Exactly. And you can see how founders work through it.
Yeah, exactly. So true. That's a great take. Thank you very much. Before we get to our wrap up questions, Molly, I want to just talk a bit about US versus Europe. And you've lived on both sides of the pond and had a real insight into the sort of different dynamics of those markets. So, what for you, as someone that's lived in both the UK and the US, what are the biggest differences for you, especially when it comes to being a VC in those markets?
Yeah, my perspective on this is that in Europe, the founders, I'd say, present as far less ambitious, keyword present. They come off as much more measured and rational. And as investors, I think we have a lot of confidence that whoever you back can actually pull off what they say they can. And so the task for us is to really see who is sort of like crazy enough to go after the entire global market and who has that drive. In the US, I feel like the founders present themselves as super ambitious and aggressive, but the challenge is to figure out who can actually pull it off and execute. And so I feel like each market needs a little bit of the other. And European founders, I think, sometimes sell themselves a little bit too short when they're actually like so unbelievably impressive. And I think US founders sometimes maybe oversell and maybe should focus a little bit more on execution. But I'm very bullish on both ecosystems, and I love the opportunity to get to work across the two.
Yeah, amazing. And I guess you'll have seen a lot of people, a lot of companies sort of go from the US to Europe or from Europe to the US. Thinking about the latter, I'd imagine there are founders listening to this podcast who see the holy grail being the US market and like in a way to turbocharge growth. So, given that you are now based in New York, have you got any pointers or tips for UK founders thinking about moving across the pond and how they can kind of get ahead and really maximize that opportunity?
Yeah, the most important thing, and maybe this is bad news for people that love their home city, is I do think it's really important to set up a local presence. And that doesn't always mean the founder relocating there forever, but most successful companies we've seen who really make a push at this, they do have the founder move over, and finding the right talent pools is absolutely crucial, which is where folks like you come in. And good investors also can help with that. Like that is, our bread and butter as well. But there are a lot of just sort of local differences that are super important. If you're selling into a pharmaceutical company in Germany versus a pharmaceutical company in New York or New Jersey, I guess it's where more pharma companies are, the sales process is going to be very distinct. The Germans are probably going to want to have a lot more process and organization than the New Jerseyans. But learning that local nuance can only really be done by hiring teams who have actually seen that story before.
So true. Yeah. Thank you very much for sharing. I'd imagine it's lovely to be back home, but you must be missing some bits of London. So before we get to these final two questions, I've got to ask, what are you missing about not being in rainy old London?
So much. I love London. Okay, so pubs for sure. We don't really have pubs at all here. Like it's just bars
No,
and
do you know what? That is so true. It's such a unique British thing. I don't know what it says about the level of alcoholism in our culture, but there is nothing better than being in a country pub or a London pub, sitting in and settling in for a Sunday afternoon.
oh, it's so cozy. I know, I love it. And yeah, and the fact that you can just be there all day and play board games. I also miss crumpets. We don't have those. I used to have a crumpet with peanut butter, which is kind of like a mix between the US and London for breakfast sometimes. Double-decker buses, those are great. I feel like this is all like food and sitting down, but but I mean the people most of all. Like I'm lucky enough, I still go back to London every month or so, or 6 weeks rather, and so I still get to reconnect with my network there very often.
Good. Pleased to hear it. Well, this is 40 Minute Mentor, Molly. You've been a great guest. But before you leave, I have to ask if you could be mentored by anyone, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
I'm so lucky. I have so many mentors that I already work with that I'm so grateful to, and I'm tempted to say them, but I'm not. I'm going to go outside of VC land. I think I would maybe go with Steven Spielberg. As you know, I love making little movies and stuff, but what I like about him is some of his work was to make money, like he did big blockbuster crazy things. Some of his work he made because he cared about the mission of it and he wanted the story to be told. And I think he, really knew how to balance that kind of ambition, excellence, creativity with doing good for the world. And he was also known to be a great mentor to J.J. Abrams. So I feel like it's a safe bet. Like I know he's good at mentorship. I mean, he's also supposed to be a great guy and he's alive, so it's more realistic. I'll go Steven Spielberg.
Love that. He's also the director of some of my favorite ever films. So I think you can't go wrong with a mentor like that. And that's the first for the podcast, Molly. So thank you very much for sharing.
Oh, good. Okay. I didn't listen to every single episode, although I have been listening. So I'm glad to hear that.
That's a good one. And what final piece of advice would you like to leave our listeners with today, whether that's career advice or life advice?
I think the best piece of advice, which is advice I've been given in the past, is rip off the band-aid on things that intimidate you. When I started out my career, for instance, I was really bad with numbers and I was like scared of them and I was scared of Excel and I didn't want to talk about numbers ever. And I sort of just tried to rip off the band-aid and just like go really into it and make myself like it. And it avoided then having years of being slightly insecure about numbers and that just feeling like you can confront your anxieties, I think is a really powerful thing in life and also in work.
Yeah, that's really great advice. And as somebody, as a fellow history grad who is not the best with numbers, albeit I've been running a business for 12 years, there's hope for us yet. So thank you for sharing
We've
it.
got it. We've got it going
Yeah,
on.
thank you. Thank you. That's what I needed to hear. Molly, it's been an absolute privilege. Thank you so much for sharing your career story and so many great bits of mentorship and advice for our listeners. I really appreciate it. And yeah, it sounds like you're going to have a very busy year given the space that you invest in. And I just wish you all the very best for it. And yeah, hopefully we can catch up when next time you're over this side of the pond.
Thank you so much for having me, James, and for doing this podcast. It's really amazing and pleased to be a part of it.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Cheers. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. I really hope that you found it useful and inspiring. If we have left any questions unanswered, or if you have any feedback or guest recommendations for future series, then please make sure you get in touch on info@jbmc.co.uk. I often get asked by listeners how you can help us spread the word about 40 Minute Mentor. There are two simple ways you can help. Firstly, share this episode on your preferred social media platform, and LinkedIn is probably where I'm most likely to see it. And you can also leave us a review on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Every share on social media and review left on the podcast platforms really helps us to get 40 Minute Mentor in front of new audiences and share the power of mentorship even further. Thank you so much for your ongoing support, and I look forward to seeing you again next Wednesday for even more pocket sized mentorship.